All right, we'll get rolling. Welcome to Keeping Radio and Podcasts Fun. And we've got a couple of great speakers on this topic. We've got Adam Gold, host of The Adam Gold Show, North Carolina Sportscaster of the Year with WRAL Radio, and then Adam Witten from Learfield, also the play-by-play voice for Appalachian State football. Guys, introduce yourselves maybe, and we'll get this thing rolling.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. As you can hear, my accomplishment's far more nebulous than the person sitting to my left. But so at Learfield, that's what I'm going to lean on mostly for this session today, which is keeping the content that we do fun and entertaining. At Learfield, we have a network of college sports podcasts that exceeds over 100 shows, and we've also partnered with a lot of national shows in college sports and outside of college sports around the country. And so we've seen, we've heard, we've experienced, and we've worked with a lot of variety. And we've noticed what works, what doesn't work, what we like, and what we don't like. And this topic is going to be very subjective. But I hope that in this session, my experience in working with podcasts at Learfield and all the different content providers will be able to speak to this topic and give folks some ideas on how to keep things where the audience really becomes attached to what you do.
I'm Adam Gold with 99.9 The Fan in Raleigh. The show is actually syndicated. You can hear the third hour of the show on Sports Hub Tryout out here. You can hear us in the mountains where you live. On ESPN Asheville. Anyway, we'll talk about some radio issues, and we'll talk about podcasting, and I do a Carolina Hurricanes specific podcast it's fairly successful. We'll get into why that is, but we're going to talk about keeping it fun and keeping it interesting, and what's more important among those two things. I don't think, do I have to give it? I've been in North Carolina since 1998, and I haven't been asked to leave yet.
All right, so I wanted to maybe start it off with this question, Adam, and that is, when your day is over, or your show is over at least, your day may not be over, how do you define success? How do you define whether or not you had a good show or that you're doing your job well from an audience perspective when it comes to entertaining them? How do you define that?
Well, I think I'll call myself a chef. Or somebody, maybe not a chef, but somebody who makes dinner. Did I think it was good? I know what I think is good. And what I'm hoping, and I've always used this as a gauge for the radio shows that I have done, and I have hosted since March of 98. Did I entertain me? And there are days where I don't, and I know it when I walk out, but I've always kind of figured out, do I think that I entertained me on that day? And I know it's going to sound weird, is that every time I do a show, I try to do something that I enjoy. And if I can do that, then I'm going to take a chance that the people who listen are also enjoying it. But there's just no way to measure it on a day-to-day basis. Radio doesn't work like that. Television, you're going to get ratings the next day or the day after. But that doesn't happen in radio. Even though we have new ways of getting ratings, which are monthly, and there are even ways to monitor, like a 2-week gap. I mean, that's kind of recent, but it used to be like you'd have to wait 4 months. Like the radio you did in March, you wouldn't get the ratings for that until like July. So everything is such a massive time gap. So you can't try to. There's no metric that tells you, yes, that was a good show. You got a 38 out of 40 today. So it's all how I feel about it when I walk out. When I'm done like doing an interview or have a guest, I know if I did a good job with it based on, gosh, should have asked this, should have asked this. If I don't have those moments, I feel like I've done a good job.
So I'll share from a podcast perspective, and I was kind of going back and thinking, all right, what show provides the best example, is the best case study for keeping things fun, and why that matters more so than how many people are listening. I don't believe, and I'll speak to podcasting because that's my experience. Adam is the talk show host expert. I don't believe you should do a podcast with the main goal, or one of the main goals being trying to get as many listeners as possible. That's not the way to build a successful podcast. That's not the way to build successful content. The best example I can think of is a show that we partnered with for a couple of years up until recently, and some of you may have heard of this, the Shutdown Fullcast. Anybody familiar with that show? So it's hosted by 4 individuals: Spencer Hall, Ryan Nanny, Jason Kirk, Holly Anderson. They used to work for Vox Media. Some of them got laid off. They took their show away. That company did not understand necessarily their show. They kind of called it a niche podcast. So their show went away. We picked it up. We partnered with them for 2 years in doing their show. And I was never a listener until we started partnering with them. And then I started listening because that's a show that we work with, and we were trying to monetize and try to help grow. And there's no audience interaction necessarily during the show itself. It is basically just a conversation amongst the 4 of them where they are having a great time telling jokes, making each other laugh, and they're not necessarily speaking to an audience. They're speaking to each other, and they're doing things that they're going to enjoy talking about without any sort of thought to what's the audience going to think of this? What are our listeners going to think of this? But their chemistry is fantastic. They're all very bright, very, very funny. And then all of a sudden, as a listener, you kind of get it and you just want to be a part of it, right? That's what makes it fun, is if you are creating an atmosphere, an environment that people just want to be a part of. Not because it's necessarily they want to give a hot take to your hot take or something like that. It's just they have a great time. I want to be a part of that. So they take to Twitter and they follow them and they support them in any way possible. They buy their products that they're advertising for. We got an advertiser for them. I won't mention which one it was, but we sold an advertisement, a very substantial advertiser to their show, and they never asked us how many people listen. That's rare. In podcasting or in radio, they want to know your audience, right? This advertiser didn't care. They say, I love their show. I know their audience is loyal. I know they have a stickiness to them. I want to be a part of this, and I want my brand to be a part of this. And that, to me, is the best example that I can think of in terms of doing it right when your soul, not your soul, but your main priority, S-O-L-E, not S-O-U-L, priority is, your main priority is not how many people are listening. It's, are we having fun? Are we creating an environment that people just want to come inside the tent, right? So if you haven't listened to the show, check it out. You'll see you'll hear what I'm talking about. They never want to do video, so you'll just hear what I'm talking about. That's a great example, I think, that I was trying to come up with in terms of a podcast that makes it fun and seems to be the biggest motivator to doing what they do and the content that they create.
Because I'm involved in both angles here. I'm involved in the radio and in podcasting. Radio, your job is to make it appealing to as many people as possible. That's how we stay employed. And my boss, who's actually going to be at the dinner tonight, has always talked about it like a circle. Like radio, you don't want to be in the middle of the circle. You want to be on the outside of the circle because that's where you're covering the most ground. So it's more eye level. Podcasting is completely different because there are very few podcasts that generate so many listeners, just so few. And I'll use my own Hurricanes podcast as an example here. I don't know exactly what the number is, but I think there were a little bit more than 2,000 downloads of one of my podcasts during the playoffs. And I do a podcast after every Hurricanes game. So we had like 21 something. That was the 13th most listened to hockey podcast in the United States. Just over 2,000. The podcasting numbers are, you don't even realize how small they are. There's just a handful of podcasts that create hundreds of thousands of listeners. So few, to the point where you're a top 10% podcast if you can get like 1,000 downloads in a week. And this year, especially in the playoffs, when we're doing a podcast every 3 days, or rather 3 times a week or 4 times a week, we were getting anywhere from 7,000 to 9,000. So I don't even know where that ranks in the top percentage. So the podcasting numbers are small. But what you're supposed to do, what I do, is, and we'll get this speaks to the fun, is it's such a targeted audience because there are everybody's got a podcast. I mean, to be perfectly honest, every one of you could, if you had the equipment, you could start a podcast. And then you and 8 friends can listen to it, and that's fine. As long as you're doing something that you like to do and you have enough of an audience that will come back and listen, that's fine. But it's such a targeted audience. I know exactly what our audience wants. They really just want to hear about their favorite team beyond what they would hear on the radio, beyond the length of the post-game show. Or maybe they're not even in town, so they don't hear the post-game show. They just want, please talk about the Hurricanes. I don't care what you say, whether I agree or disagree. So it's a targeted audience. The numbers, which, I mean, are pretty good. Like, the company is pretty happy that it's like the #1 daily done podcast. Like my radio show has a best of podcast. And I get 10 times the amount of traffic almost for the Canes podcast than I do for the best of the Adam Gold show, which is, I use air quotes because, frankly, who knows if it's good. I mean, I think maybe, but again, it's just a condensed version of the show. It's almost offensive to call it a podcast because it's not done that way. But the two things are so different. You're trying to grab an audience and a big audience with the other one with the radio, but in podcast, you're really narrow casting to a certain number. If I only had 2,000 people listening to my show, my radio show every day, I wouldn't have a radio show. I wouldn't. No chance. That number's got to be higher. Otherwise, no advertising. Maybe that's why there's not a lot of money in podcast advertising. I should rethink things.
There is a lot of money, but like wealth in this country, it's the top 1% that are getting it. And I mean, because when you're getting a podcast that's inching toward 10,000 downloads, you're probably at least in the 90th percentile. Go look it up, and you'll find that you'd be amazed how where you rank, even if your podcast is getting 300, 400, 500 downloads per episode, you'd still rank really, really high. And I think 10 people actually started a podcast in the amount of time we've been talking. So that was a joke. Thank you. One of the things I wanted to get into is interviews with guests, or as I think you and I would both agree, we call them conversations, because that lends itself to a better dynamic. Fun in radio or in podcasts, or sometimes there's a lot of overlap between the two. But in creating content and talking with guests, talking with interesting people about interesting things, when do those conversations, Adam, become more fun and more enjoyable to not only the listener, but to you, the host?
First of all, there are two different types of interviews. There's a more newsy, I need to get information out of this person. That's one thing. And as an example, the Carolina Panthers, Freudian. No. The Carolina Panthers, because it's about that. It's about the essentially the breakup with the Panthers and their practice facility / entertainment complex in Rock Hill, South Carolina. And when news first broke that was going south, we had a South Carolina State representative on the program, and I don't have a relationship with him, but I'm not trying to have a relationship with him. I'm trying to get information. Why did this break down? What happened between you and the Panthers? Did they say this? Did they break promises here? Did you break promises? So that's an information interview, and I am firing questions at him trying to get information. So that's that. And I would say that's about 10% of when we have a guest on, that's about 10% of it. The other 90% is, hey, we're going to talk about this today. Let's have on my friend who does this. Almost everybody that I'll have on the show, I've, for the most part, had a beer with. Or, as in my friend Mike DeCourcy of the Sporting News, Diet Coke Light Ice, because he doesn't drink. And he doesn't like ice watering down his Diet Coke. So these are all friends. Mike will be happy that I cited him today. If there's a transcript, he'll have a blast. So they're more conversations. And a lot of the stuff, I have my own opinions. And my own opinions are going to shape our conversation. And I have plenty of people that I have on and we have disagreeing points of view. But that's okay, because I kind of feel like I have an informed opinion, whether I'm right or wrong, or you believe I'm right or wrong. So they're just conversations, which is why I tend to be a little bit more long-winded with those. I mean, I know radio, they tell you to do like 6 or 8 minute interviews, and like, yeah, good luck with that. Because I'm really I want friends of mine to come on, and we're going to talk about, and we might talk about a couple of other things first, and then get to a specific issue. But in terms of the initial point about when do you get the most out of, I think you get the most out of people when they trust you, and I think my friends trust me, and if it is really a conversation. And sometimes there's going to be difficult topics. I'm friends with the head coach of the Hurricanes. And sometimes I have to ask him a difficult question. But he trusts me, and he's not going to call me, he's not going to have a problem with something that I said, because he understands that, I have my own opinion. And it's funny, he's actually brought up his disagreements with me, completely unrelated to our conversations on the air, which happened not that long ago. But it's when they feel comfortable with you that you get the most out of them. And maybe that's why I just have friends on, and I don't need to talk to anybody else.
So let's say,
I'm long-winded.
No, pick up the name that you dropped too with being friends with Rod Brindamore. I mean, that's impressive. But let me say, for example, you have Sebastian Aho on the show, who plays for the Hurricanes. What tends to bring a more entertaining conversation? Is it talking about the team and games and hockey, or is it talking about totally not random, but other things that he might be interested in that have nothing to do with his profession?
See, that's a very good question. When I have those guys are on more than anything simply to, you accused me of name dropping. I would never do that. But it's really just to, hey, we had Sebastian Aho on. Or in some cases, it helps them out to raise their profile to fans, because we are the media or the conduit between the athlete and their fans. Yes, social media does some, but a lot of these guys are not that active not everybody's Draymond Green. So, but with Aho, yeah, we'll talk a little bit about hockey, but frankly, these guys don't want to talk about what happened on this play. I'm like, those answers are awful. And they're good for post-game show, game-specific, or I would talk to Aho for 3 minutes. But if I'm going to have Sebastian on the show, I'm going to talk to him about golf, right? A passion of his outside of hockey. I'm going to talk to him about his sauna. His big he had a sauna built in his house, and all the Finns on the team, and there are a lot, they all go meet at Aho's house and go in the sauna. I mean, I'm just going to leave that there. And I think my favorite conversation with Sebastian was a few years ago, the first time they made the playoffs in a decade. And I was just BSing with him in the locker room, and I said, and this wasn't even a conversation that was on the air. I said, by the way, I love your playoff beard. And he just looked at me, and he had like 8 hairs just scattered. He goes, no, you don't. And he just stared like he was joking, but like he's got it's hard to have a sense of humor when you don't really have a great grasp of the English language. Svechnikov is better. But not talking about their game, that's when you get these guys to just relax. I talked to Brett Pesce about video games. I don't play video games. My kid does. And so I talked to him about my son playing video games. And you get the most out of these guys when you're talking about things that are not their profession.
So I can relate this a little bit to my work doing play-by-play at App State. And we do a lot of content that's more conversation-based. So there's a weekly coaches show that we'll do on a Tuesday night where we're visiting with a head coach, an assistant, and usually one of the student athletes. And then in a lot of pregame shows in college and pros, especially for audio broadcasts, we'll have some type of segment that revolves around a conversation with one of the players, right? One of the athletes. So we have one on our pregame show. Well, we had for years and years and years, we've been doing this. You grab them after practice, you talk to them, ask them 4 or 5 questions, and you say, tell us what kind of effort it's going to take this Saturday, or what are the keys to victory? Hey, how much confidence did it give you to have 75 tackles and 17 quarterback sacks? And they say, a lot of confidence. We're just continuing to build one game at a time, blah, blah, blah. So we made the decision, in the spirit of trying to generate better content, more fun and entertaining content, we said, let's take the broadcaster out of the equation and let's see if we can find one of our current players to do the interview. So we found Junior. He was a safety on the team, and luckily enough, he wanted to have a career in journalism or broadcasting. And so I met with him and I said, I'd like for you to do the interviews or the conversations with your teammates, the people that you're spending all your time around. 1, they'll open up to you more. 2, you know way more about them than I do, and so you're just going to be able to ask them interesting questions that you're just going to know because you're friends with them. To your point about having your friends on as guests, you just know things about them, and you know the things that are going to get them to really open up and provide you with a great conversation. And so we started doing that, and the conversations turned into, who's the best gamer on the team? If you could create a 4x100 relay team with other guys on the team, who would you put on there? Who's your starting 5 amongst players on the team if we're playing pickup ball? That kind of stuff. And then you just learn these really interesting facts about the things that they like and don't like that have nothing to do with the sport that they play, and they stick with you. When you ask about, if I'm talking to a student athlete about a game or about their performance, very rarely are the answers going to stick with me. But when I get some of the really interesting facts and nuggets just about them personally, because they're being asked the questions by someone that truly knows them, now all of a sudden I'm enjoying the interview more. It can be a little lighter, more fun, and I'm going to take away a lot more from the conversation. So there's that part of it. And then if I'm actually having the conversation, I remember having Taylor Lamb, who was our quarterback, all-timer. Now he's coaching quarterbacks at University of Virginia. We had him on our coaches show one week, and he had mastered the art of being the robot quarterback, right? You ask him the question, and it's just I'm just really thankful. My offensive line really helped me out, and our running backs are nobody can stop them, and I'm just trying to make sure that I do my best to lead the team, and we're just gonna play tough, play hard. We respect the other team. Blah blah blah. It didn't matter what question I asked him. If it was about football, that's the answer that I'm getting. And I was still early in my career in doing this job, and I just kind of paused and said, all right, let's put the football away. Clearly this is not working. Let's talk about golf. Who's going to win the Masters this year? And we can argue about it, and all of a sudden you talk about golf, or you talk about the things that they like to do outside of football, the things that they enjoy, because sometimes the sport feels like work, and it's all you get asked about and all you talk about and all you do 24/7. Let's talk about the things that you like. Talk about gaming, talk about food, talk about golf, talk about what their life, growing up when they were kids, things like that, when they got into trouble, and tell us something about your roommate that we don't know that's really going to embarrass them. Then they open up and they have a great conversation with you. But Adam, I want to ask you, because I get this sometimes, which is I know that those conversations are going to be the most enjoyable, but I still get the feedback of, hey, we don't want to hear about that. Talk about sports. Talk about football. This is a football show. This is football conversation. You shouldn't be talking about other things. Talk about football more. How do you balance that? And do you get some of that feedback?
Well, again, just to the radio part, you're talking to a lot of different people, and you want as many people as possible to be entertained by it. So there's a balance. Before I fully answer that question, the two best interviews that I've ever done with Roy Williams had nothing to do with basketball. Zero to do with basketball. Talked to him about the Masters. We did like 10 minutes just on the Masters. And I actually wrote a story about his designer, if you will. Alexander Julian is a designer who's a UNC grad, who, if you've ever been to on Franklin Street, he has a store. I mean, he does most of his work in New York, but he's got a store. Alexander Julian has a store on Franklin Street, where I actually went in. I interviewed the people that work there. I talked to Roy about it. I speak to Alexander Julian every once in a while now anyway. But Roy had a blast talking about his clothes. Yeah. So these guys they talk about their sport all the time, and there is no interview worse than a coach's interview. I hate them. Hate them. They're not fun for me, so they're probably not going to be fun for the people who listen, except for the diehards. And no offense to any diehards. You're not going anywhere. There's no place for you to go to get what you want other than my show. So I'm not catering to you. I'm going to cater to the most people. Are we going to ask a couple of questions about your quarterback? Yeah. But we're going to get in and out of those, and then we're going to get to the fun stuff. I talked to Dave Clawson about the Talking Heads. Big Talking Heads fan, and he gave me a hard time because he asked me what my favorite album was, and I said, Stop Making Sense. He goes, come on, it's a greatest hits album. How can you, I'm sorry, that's what I like. He goes, I got no respect for that. Anyway, so it was a good back and forth. To answer your question, these guys are all coming on to advance something, to advance maybe in some cases to sell tickets, in some cases to just highlight something that's going on in their program. Sometimes it's a sense of obligation, like, oh, we have to do these. And actually, for the longest time, Dave Doran was only a sense of obligation. I don't want to do this. I'm not going to give you anything when we do it. I've gotten to the point where I can joke around with Doran now, and he has been amenable to doing a bunch of other things, like we did during the Super Bowl a couple of years ago when it was Kansas City and Tampa Bay. We had a different team's fan on every day, and Friday, the last day of that week, Doran's a big Kansas City Chiefs fan. So we had, it was a trivia contest with the two fans. So as Doran went up against a random Buccaneers fan, and they didn't know that, this guy who was a Buccaneers fan didn't know that he was going up against Dave Doran. He beat Doran, but it was just fun that Doran at that point was kind of cool enough to just kind of relax. So we're not talking about his team. We're just goofing off. But fans just want to hear their favorite coach or whatever on the air. And yes, they want something out of it, so we do a little bit of it. But it's David Cutcliffe is the only coach I ever liked talking to because it was so little about Duke football, because frankly, kind of had to be. And it was just a lot about other things. If it's not about other things, I'm not going to have any fun. And then I'm serving just that much of my audience, which is already small.
So, and I don't want to break format here, Darren, but I do want to pause for just a second just to maybe see if, thank you all, first of all, for being here. Really appreciate it. I just want to pause to see if anyone has any questions before we continue on. No? Okay. Let's move on.
We've covered it all.
Yeah, we have. You know, one of the things I think is interesting when it comes to podcast and sports radio content is the reactions you get from people and how invested and how interesting the conversation can be when you're talking about sports related stuff versus lifestyle things. You know, it's what do you get more reaction to? Is it will the Hurricanes make the playoffs? If you ask that question on Twitter or on the air and you ask people to chime in, or if you say, do you cut the crust off of your turkey sandwich? You know, that kind of stuff. What do you tend to get more reaction to, and how do you let that play into steering your content because you know that that's going to get the audience maybe a little more invested?
Well, I'm going to use a real life example that happened just a few minutes ago, but the larger answer is the lifestyle stuff. I mean, unless you're making a prediction on a game or something, and famously, I don't know if anybody remembers this, but in 2004, the Red Sox trailed the Yankees. It was, to be accurate, it was 2-0 on a Friday, or it might have been a Thursday, 2-0, and I said, even if they lose Game 3, I think they'll win the series.
Fine to take.
Right? It's a thing that happened. But so a lot of people remember that, but it's the other stuff. It's the stuff that has nothing to do with sports. I believe Eric, that's you. So Eric came up to me before we came up here, and he was talking about there was a Rolling Stone magazine released their top 500 songs of all time, and Nirvana's "Smells Like Teen Spirit" was 5th. Which, look, I'll editorialize here: trash. It's not even the best Nirvana song. Not even the 5th best Nirvana. Yeah, I'm not a Nirvana fan, but there's at least one Nirvana song that I would way listen to ahead of "Smells Like Teen Spirit." In fact, I didn't even know the title of that song until it was 5th, and I went and listened to it. I'm like, oh gosh, that's the 5th best song. So it created a recurring bit on the show for probably 3 months, where we would compare, like, the 438th best song is "Help" by the Beatles, and I'm like, oh yeah, but that's not even close to as good as "Smells Like Teen Spirit." So that went on for 3 months, and those types of things get way more fun response, and I think go towards keeping more people interested in the show, because it has, again, I referenced this a second ago. Sports radio is by nature a niche format. And then when you're talking about specific teams or sports, it goes even further. Get even smaller. I'll throw out random figures. If 10% of the whole radio audience, and I think this is high, if 10% of the whole radio audience is interested in sports, then 25% of that audience is interested in the NBA. If I'm talking about the NBA, then I have this, and then I have that. But the stuff that everybody's basically interested in, just the fun stuff. Do you pour cereal in the milk, or do you pour milk on the cereal, or what's your favorite board game, or that stuff gets way more response because it's more there's more commonality.
Yeah. Lifestyle is key into really getting your audience just irrationally upset about something simple, like, by the way, I am cereal first, then the milk. which is the way it should be. But it's interesting on television. Live sports is king, especially the NFL. It's always going to bring the highest ratings. Live sports continues to be immune to the changing habits of the media consumer. Podcasts, though, on the other hand, sports is at best fifth in terms of categories. It's comedy, it's news, it's true crime. I guess you could call lifestyle in there somewhere, but sports is not at the top. I don't know that it'll ever be at the top when it comes to podcasts. So to Adam's point, it is a niche format to a certain degree. So you have to work in some ways to really try to relate to people in areas other than sports. One of the things I wanted to get into that I think makes things fun, not just for the host, but I think for the audience as well, and the things that I get the most feedback on. I won't really get much of a text or a Twitter mention or things like that if there was a play that happened in a game and I happen to have a good call of it. I'm not going to get an immediate response from somebody, but if I make a joke at the expense of my broadcast partner, I'll get a text that say, "Oh, that was tremendous. That was hilarious. I really enjoyed that." Or a tweet will come in and just say, "They just talked about this. It was really funny." As somebody who used to co-host a show, now you do one solo, but you still work with a producer, so you are bouncing stuff off of people. Having that chemistry with the people that you're working with to where you can have some ribbing back and forth that, it can be a little embarrassing or shameful for the other person, but it's all in good fun, and they can take it because you're friends and you have that chemistry and you have that trust and relationship. To me, that can make it fun. There are jokes that you can make that you might laugh at together, but the audience is totally checked out on. But I think sometimes doing things at the expense of your partner can be funny and generate more of a reaction. So I find that with my broadcast partner, and I try to do that not as much as possible, but I try to work that in where I can because it gives the people something to laugh at. There's not much to laugh at when you're calling football play-by-play. They're listening to find out what's happening in the game. But if I can work in something that's going to get someone to laugh or smile, now I've really done a good job because it's generated different kinds of emotions from people, and maybe wants to make them listen more often than watch a game on TV because they're going to have an entertainment value that they can't get by just checking a score on Twitter or watching the game on TV.
I have a couple of things about this. First, I just recently got a new producer. His name is Dennis Cox. My old producer is somebody that Adam worked with. Maybe I think you hired. Maybe at some point, Alec Campbell is now out of the business, and he and I became really good friends, and we had great on-air chemistry. And what you want to do is you want to make the listener, this is the way I've always done it, try to make the listener feel like he's just one of the gang hanging out, which is also what I've tried to do with the podcast, is at times speak in my own mind directly to the people who I know are listening. Just to try to get them, to make them feel included. So with radio, you want to have them included in the joke. So whether it's making fun of each other or making fun of myself, I'm always about that. Like, I don't see movies. And so it's a running joke that I did not see this movie. Jurassic Park. Did not see it.
What's the last movie you saw?
Well, I mean, it's not like I haven't seen any movies. Oh, yeah. It was probably animated. No, I saw the most recent Bond. Okay. That was probably the most recent new movie that I have seen. Okay. The most recent Bond, which I liked. But it doesn't fit into what I do on a regular basis. So it's really, few and far between. But so I want people to kind of understand it's a joke. It's fine. You if you want to make jokes at my expense, I am here for that. It's because it's a challenge to beat me to the joke about me. I am willing to do that. But you talk, right? I challenge you to beat me to my own joke. But you were talking about the difference between working with a partner and without, or just you had reference that I used to have one. And this is an actual conversation that happened between me and my former partner, Joe Ovius, who does afternoons on the station where I do noon to 3. He has a partner now, and I'm working by myself. And this was when Vin Scully announced his retirement. You all know who Vin Scully is, right? So Scully, for decades, has done Dodgers games on TV by himself. There was no Scully and this guy. It was just Scully. And a conversation that we were having, Joe and I, about one of the great things is that I've always admired that Scully worked alone, that he wasn't, and as I started to get into this, I realized I am going down a fairly, not dangerous, but funny, pointed path that I've always appreciated, that Scully did it alone, that he wasn't burdened by a broadcast partner. And Joe was sitting there going, what are you saying? And like, I'm not saying that it was true, might have been, but so the joke just sort of, I didn't have to say it. I didn't have to make a joke. The joke was sitting there for people who wanted to see it. Joe saw it, whether he thought it was real or not, doesn't matter. It was funny. And that kept being brought back to me. Like, it's just, well, I don't even know if it was pertinent to what we were talking about. But I thought it was funny, and it just triggered a memory in my own mind.
Yeah, and listeners, I'm sure, enjoyed it too. Oh, yeah. You know, that's. Let me ask real quick. Kind of go around here. What do you all enjoy listening to? What's your name?
Dave. Well,
Dave. What do you enjoy listening to?
most sports talk. Are we talking type, post?
What's the thing that if you're saying, man, this is a really tough day, listening to this will put me in a better mood?
Generally, I'll catch Dan Patrick's show on podcast.
Yeah.
And this is going to sound crazy. I like to find the crazy podcast, like the paranormal stuff.
Yeah.
I find it, don't believe it, but I find it highly entertaining to listen to people's UFO abductions. I don't believe any of it, but it is entertaining for a commute this hour.
Yeah.
Talk about niche podcasting.
Yeah. Nick, what about you?
So I'm a huge Atlanta Braves fan. I grew up in Atlanta, so anything that the Braves Radio Network puts out, they do like a pre-game show in the morning. It's like 15 minutes, usually 10, 15 minutes. I'll listen to that. But aside from that, I grew up a huge pro wrestling fan when I was a kid. So there's a guy out there, Conrad Thompson, that does all these different podcasts with former wrestlers.
He's figured it out, by the way.
What's that?
He's figured it out. The podcast game,
No kidding.
Conrad, yeah.
Yeah, so his stuff, some of it's super long form too. So like if I'm in the car, I've got 2-3 hours, I might just throw one on and just let it go.
Yeah. Penny, what about you?
I typically listen to interviews. I like Conan's podcast. I like Rob Lowe's podcast.
Yeah.
I like to hear intricate stories of stories you haven't heard about celebrities and other people in the public sector.
Yeah.
It's usually what I'll grab on.
Yeah. So it's interesting. We asked 3 people, and Dave mentioned Dan Patrick, but he had a different energy about him when he started talking about the other stuff, right? Same with Nick, talking about the Braves podcast. He's like, but then I listen to pro wrestling stuff with Conrad, and Penny's talking about something outside of sports as well. It's that's kind of what I'm getting at, which is the things that when all of a sudden when we're exploring the world of podcasting and every piece of content, every category is at our fingertips, what do we really want to listen to make ourselves to just put ourselves in a better place, right?
This was interesting. First of all, Nick, how did you feel about Freddie Freeman not signing with the Braves? I'm not saying this as a Mets fan. I'm just asking.
We're halfway to walking down the Mets, by the way.
Yeah, no, I think the Braves are really good. So
It shouldn't have come to this. I think his agent misrepresented what his client wanted.
I don't know the intricacies of what broke down there. What I do know is that Freddie Freeman should have never worn another uniform.
Yeah.
Right? And it was just really cool to see the emotions well up, not just in the pregame press conference, but on the field from both sides. The ovation was awesome.
No never seen anything like that.
I agree with you. The only thing that would come close to that for me would be when Tom Seaver returned to Shea Stadium as a member of the Cincinnati Reds after the Mets traded him in 1977. I don't know why I was just thinking about Freddie Freeman and the Braves, especially having just seen it. It didn't suck that he got a big hit yesterday, for me, as a Mets fan. What were we talking about again?
The fact that we had 3 people. Yeah.
Oh, no, podcast.
See that how I tried to take the microphone? You just yanked
No. Now you remembered. I remembered. Like, the podcasts that I generally listen to are, I do like a true crime, investigative reporting. Our station, the TV station, WRAL, did a podcast about the murder of Michael Jordan's dad. But I had listened to one that was done by The Score in Chicago 3 years prior. Same general idea, which was a deep dive into. Now, it could have been anything. It just happened to be I had some familiarity with the subject matter. But I've listened to podcasts about organized crime, the mob. I've listened to podcasts about political conspiracies like the murder of RFK. So that stuff is fascinating to me, and you can lose yourself. Those are the things you can binge listen to, like a show on TV. And I have about a 45-minute commute every, to and from every day. So, because when I'm done with sports radio, I'm done with sports radio. So I'm kind of going to try to listen to something else, or I'm going to do a deep dive into things that I would read if I had more time. So like legal issues with sports and stuff that I might use on the air. It'll be more informational, less entertaining. But yeah, it speaks to the fact that we get lost in, like, the podcasts are pointed. They're not broad. Radio's got to be big and broad and eye level. And the other stuff is for, like, you could listen to, nobody would do a segment on radio, sports talk radio. I guess you could do a small segment on it, but we can't do an hour on it because the people who are really into it, who are not into it, was just like, what? We're out. But I wouldn't do that for baseball either. I wouldn't do it for hockey either. Even when the Hurricanes are in the playoffs, I wouldn't do it for that.
So we've got maybe 5 minutes left. I know this has been great. One thing I wanted to ask you, because I think this is more pertinent to sports radio than it is to podcasting, because podcasting, you can make your own schedule. You can essentially do what you want unless you have bosses that are, helping with the content. But this time of year that we're entering into, right? College World Series just ended. It's baseball. You don't have NFL training camps getting going until late July. So you've got a stretch here where it's really just baseball. And I've heard sports radio hosts that have said this is the toughest time of year to do the job, but I've also heard that this is the most fun time of year to do the job because you can stray away from sports and it's okay because there's nothing to cover. The Hurricanes are done. The Panthers aren't starting training camp for a while. Maybe you can talk about the Braves here and there, but I'd like to know from you how you treat or how you view the month of July on the sports calendar and whether it's a fun time of year to be doing sports radio.
It's always fun. I'm not kidding. There's never a day where I don't want to do it. It's harder to find, like when you're in season, subject matter is thrown at you. I mean, it just hits you in the face. You wake up, I know exactly, maybe I don't know how I'm going to talk about something, but I know what I'm going to talk about. When the seasons are all over, there are days where there's nothing obvious to discuss. And those are the days that allow you to be more creative. And you're always, I used to walk around, I don't do it as much now because I'm married and I have kids and I have other obligations, so I don't have as much time to do this. but I used to walk around with like a legal pad of just kind of, when there's nothing to talk about, we can talk about this. And I have a lot of those things in my head anyway. And I was actually, because I live in Oxford, North Carolina, had about a 90-minute ride out here. So I was thinking about some of those things. Hey, tomorrow, I know what there are certain things we're going to talk about, but outside of those things, how can we make it fun? And how can you just, because, look, it's hot. People just want to laugh or be entertained. How can we just kind of keep it wide open, even include, we don't take phone calls on my show. I haven't taken phone calls in, gosh, I don't know how many years. It's 8 years since we stopped really taking phone calls. But now would be the time to kind of, hey, you're, I don't know, Mount Rushmore of board games. I mentioned board games before. That's not something I'd talk about. But something that is just completely off the beaten path that will just get people, hey, essentially I'm asking you to help me do my show. And that's what if it's fun, we'll do it. Otherwise, I'll just talk about live golf.
It's interesting. You would get, and to the point we were bringing up earlier, the response you would get to the Mount Rushmore of board games versus the Mount Rushmore of Carolina Panthers, you probably get a lot. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but you'd get a lot more intensity, I think, on the board games conversation than you would on something related to sports. So I think that's a general theme of what we're talking about here is when it comes to maybe tie it all back together, keeping sports and podcasts fun. Sometimes a lot of times it's veering away from sports. And it's not always about asking yourself, what does my audience think is fun? It's just create the environment of having fun with whomever you're doing the show with. Chances are there's going to be somebody there with you. Make it something fun that people just want to tune into, because the reality is, especially with sports radio and now more so with podcasts, you're catching somebody. You could be catching somebody in when they're just dealing with a lot of stress in their life. They could be on their way to work early in the morning and they're tired and they've got a long day coming up, or they've just had a long day at work and they're on their way home. And sometimes, I know for me, when I'm in the car, it can be peaceful, right? And I just want to turn something on, a podcast or a station, where I'm just going to enjoy myself and get a smile on my face. And there's more options now than ever, and so yes, you do want to inform to a certain degree, but you want to keep people tuned to what you're doing and make sure that you can make their day just a little bit better. And in most cases, that's doing so with a laugh. So I mean, I think about that more and more, just the environment, the state of mind that people are in when they're actually tuning into what you're doing. So I think if I just kind of had to summarize some of the things we talked about, that's the way that I would do it. But what final thoughts would you have on the topic?
If I make myself have a good time, probably make you have a good time too. Yeah. So I'm selfish in that way. I want to have fun. If I have fun, I think you will too. That's really what it boils down to. I'm just trying to get myself through it.
Any final questions? Yeah, Nick, what's up?
I got a few, but so we have a Liberty Flames podcast channel that is pretty much open-ended. I mean, I've got some original things that I've created, but when are the best times, do you think, to post things to a podcast channel? Like, is it 6 in the morning? Is it in the evening? Is there a good time? And I guess what are some of the ways that you promote, like, what you do for App State?
Yeah.
Like, is it social media? Is it posting a soundbite of something? Like, what are some ideas that you share?
Yeah, so I'll just repeat the question just for the video audience here in case the mic didn't pick it up. But the best times to release content when it comes to getting the best engagement, the most listenership. And certainly podcasts has an advantage there because the metrics can be so granular. You can go onto your hosting site and you could see how many downloads did I get it on this day, on this day, on this day. I've always heard that middle of the week, the things that I've read say that middle of the week is the best time to do it. To me, I try to not, it's kind of like an analogy with driving. You don't want to get stuck in the morning rush, because a lot of times what people will listen to is what just pops up on the top of their feed. And if everybody's releasing their feeds at 6 a.m., well, now everything's just kind of shuttling through. So for me, I might wait till like 6:05, 6:30, 7 o'clock, just to get that little advantage of being at the very top of the feed. That might get a few more people to listen. Social media is tough, because what you see on social media in terms of number of retweets and likes doesn't always translate into how many people are downloading your podcast. I don't see a lot of correlation, quite honestly, unless you've got just a massive following, with turning social media promotion into podcasts. I think what you have to do is you just have to create a gateway to what you do. So that's posting clips, that's just getting a quote out there. Don't just say, hey, we've got a new episode and we've got this person on. I mean, there's 1,000 people posting the exact same thing on their timeline. And so how are you going to separate yourself? You've got to create a gateway. You've got to be strategic about it. You know, tweeting during the day is sometimes going to be more helpful than at night when there's live games going on and things like that. So to answer your question from my perspective, when it comes to podcast, I look at middle of the week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I think Wednesday probably being the best. Early in the morning, but trying to get away from that, daybreak rush of things coming into someone's feed. And then knowing that your social media promotion doesn't always translate into downloads, and that's okay. Your social media can have a different voice than your podcast, as long as people are following along one way or another. And if it takes them to listen, great. If not, they'll listen to the next one. Podcasting is a menu, and you can choose what you want to listen to and what you don't want to listen to.
My podcast that I do for the Hurricanes is game specific more than anything. Now we're going about every 10 days. So what I will do is I'll post it before I go to bed at night, so it's there for people who get up and walk the dog and listen to it then. And then when I do get up, like every hour, 2 hours, I'll just tweet it out again. Tweet it out. Just put it at the top of your Twitter timeline. I mean, again, I don't take a scientific approach to it. The whole thing has been kind of organic in terms of how it kind of spread. And again, we were number 3 in Finland, so I don't even know what time it is in Finland. So we have so many Finns, it's kind of built in. So I don't even have a time of the day of the week. So I'm definitely the wrong guy to ask about that.
Yours is different because you have to do it as a reaction almost to a game. So you have to be quick, and you have to make sure that it can live on you. It can acquire its shelf life. It's a very short shelf life.
Is there too much you can put up there? I mean, obviously what you're doing is different because it's game to game. But like if it's a specific
I do think so. I do think there can be too much, because you're going to overload someone's feed, and it's if they like listening to 7 or 8 different podcasts, you'll be like, gosh, I can't, there's just too much for me to get through. It's too overwhelming. I'm just going to get rid of it. I do think that it's helpful to have more and more stuff so that you can continue to drive people to it and give them more options of things to listen to. But yes, I don't know what the line is, but I do think that there is a line where you can cross that it just becomes an annoyance.
I actually think the bigger issue with that, I don't think there's too much content. I don't know if you could do that, because if they're interested, they're going to be interested in something every day. I would just say that if you're going to put out a lot of content, that the content shouldn't be that long. So if I'm in a run of podcast before the season starts, then I'm going to shoot for 25 to 30 minutes tops for those types of things. Here's a preview of this, preview of this, preview of this, preview of this, or here's an interview. I might leave those as standalones for 20 minutes. So, hey, look, if you don't catch it this day, they can run through 2 or 3 in a given day, and it's not going to feel like they're overwhelmed. During the season, like occasionally they'll go an hour, but I'm generally around 40 minutes. So it's not that bad, but in the off season, you want to keep them short. We all have short attention span theater. So you probably want to keep them a little shorter, and then you don't have to worry about, oversaturating it.
Cool. Sounds like they just finished up in there.